The sea had always been a part of me. I grew up on the grey coast of the Baltic, where gulls wheeled above the surf and fishing boats bobbed in the harbor. But nothing prepared me for the day I first descended into a U-boat. It was autumn of 1939, weeks after the war began. I was 19, fresh from training, still smelling of soap and starch, when I reported to my first assignment. The boat was a Type 7, sleek on the surface but already scarred from sea trials. To my eyes, it looked like a predator, something alive, but once inside, I realized it was more like a coffin with steel ribs. The air was thick with oil, sweat, and diesel. Pipes crisscrossed the ceiling, every space filled with machinery, every bunk stacked above torpedoes or batteries. There was no privacy, no comfort. Men lived on top of one another, and every breath belonged to the boat. Our captain was a calm man in his 30s, with eyes that seemed to look through steel. He welcomed us aboard with a clipped nod, then vanished into the control room. The veterans barely noticed us recruits, except to mutter a few crude jokes about green boys and seasickness. I stowed my gear in a corner no bigger than a coffin lid, wondering how I'd ever sleep with the thrum of engines in my skull. When the hatch closed for the first time, sealing us away from the world above, I felt a jolt in my chest. The air grew heavier, smelling of metal and bodies. As the boat slipped under the surface, the sound of waves faded, replaced by the constant hum of machinery and the creak of pressure against the hull. The sea was no longer just water. It was weight, pressing in from all sides, ready to crush us if a single valve failed. The older crew joked, smoked, played cards on overturned crates. I watched them, trying to imitate their ease, though my stomach churned with every sway. One night, when the diesel fumes thickened and sweat trickled down my back, I stumbled toward the tiny latrine and barely made it before retching. Laughter echoed behind me. "Welcome to the U-Boot-Waffe," someone jeered. After that, I learned to chew stale bread slowly to calm my gut, and eventually the sickness faded. Our first patrols were in the North Sea, close to home but already dangerous. The captain drilled us relentlessly. Crash dives, silent running, torpedo drills until our hands blistered. "Speed and silence," he said again and again. That is survival. I learned to move without sound, to slide past comrades in corridors narrower than my shoulders, to strap myself into a bunk above a live torpedo and sleep while the hull groaned around me. There were moments of levity too. In the cramped galley, the cook cursed as he tried to stretch rations meant for 20 men into meals for 45. His soups were watery, his bread stale. But sometimes he surprised us with sausage or pickles, and the whole crew cheered as if he'd performed a miracle. At night, when the engines quieted, someone would hum a sailor's tune, the sound carrying through steel like a ghost. We were boys far from home, pretending to be wolves. Then came our first hunt. It was early 1940, the glückliche Zeit, the happy time, though there was little happiness in it. We intercepted a convoy off the coast of Britain. The sea was black under a moonless sky, waves breaking against the conning tower as we surfaced. Orders hissed through the boat. "Torpedos klar." I pressed myself against the bulkhead, heart hammering, as the firing solutions were calculated. When the captain gave the command, the torpedoes left with a rush of compressed air. We waited in silence. Then came the distant thud, the roar muffled by water, and a cheer went up inside the boat. Another detonation followed, closer this time, and the boat shuddered, as if the sea itself were angry. Through the periscope, the captain watched the ships burn, orange flames clawing the night sky. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a knot in my gut. In the glow of the fires, I thought I saw tiny lifeboats bobbing in the waves, men huddled together, their voices carried faintly across the water. They were enemies, yes, but they were also sailors, just like us, fighting the same sea. I turned away, but the sound lingered in my ears long after we submerged again. Back in port weeks later, we were greeted as heroes. Brass bands played, officers shook our hands, medals were pinned to uniforms, civilians waved flags, children pointed at us with wide eyes. We stood tall, proud, but inside I felt hollow. The sea had swallowed men because of us, and I had heard their cries. Still, when the order came for another patrol, I packed my kit without hesitation. I was a U-boat sailor now. The sea was my prison, my battlefield, and perhaps someday my grave. And though I feared it, I also loved it. The silent world beneath the waves, the brotherhood forged in steel and salt, the strange mix of laughter and terror. The surface world faded each time the hatch closed. Down below, we lived only in the moment, never knowing if we would see the sun again. The sea had claimed me, and I knew it would never let go. By the spring of 1940, we no longer sailed alone. The captain gathered us in the control room before our second major patrol. Maps spread across the table, his finger tracing the convoy routes. This time, he said, we hunt as a rudel, as a pack. We had heard the stories. U-boats working together, striking convoys in the night, overwhelming the escorts. The officers spoke of it with pride, of a new age of submarine warfare. For us enlisted men, it sounded both thrilling and terrifying. Hunting alone had been claustrophobic enough. But now we would be one of many, slipping like wolves through the Atlantic, teeth bared. The message came by enigma, crackling through the radio in coded bursts. A convoy was spotted southwest of Ireland. We set course, the boat trembling as the engines roared. Days of tense silence followed, the crew moving in whispers, every man on edge. Then one night, the call came again. The pack assembles. We surfaced under a sliver of moon. On the horizon, we saw shadows, other U-boats, their conning towers slicing through the waves, signal lamps flashing in the dark. My chest tightened. I had never felt such a strange mixture of pride and dread. We were part of something vast now, not just a single boat, but a wolf among wolves. The convoy appeared just before midnight, a slow parade of merchant ships lumbering through the waves, their hulls black against the starlit sea. Tankers, freighters, even a passenger liner pressed into service. All of them heavy with cargo for Britain. Destroyers prowled at the edges, searchlights sweeping, their engines growling like guard dogs. The captain barked orders. We slipped into position, stalking the prey. In the control room, the air was electric. Men crowded around the plotting tables, murmurs mixing with the constant thrum of machinery. The first torpedoes fired from another U-boat, and moments later explosions lit the horizon. Flames leapt skyward, painting the sea in orange. The wolf pack had struck. Our turn came. "Rohr 1, los!" the torpedo officer shouted. The hiss of compressed air filled the boat as the weapon shot into the dark. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then whoomp! A detonation rolled through the water. Cheers erupted. Fists pounded bulkheads. Men clapped each other's shoulders. We had hit. The convoy scattered. Ships turned wildly, their horns blaring, their escort surging to life. Searchlights pierced the night, sweeping across the waves like white blades. Then came the depth charges. The first series exploded so close the lights flickered. The boat groaned, rivets rattling as water pressed in. We dove, the captain shouting for silent running. Engines slowed, lights dimmed, men held their breath. The air thickened, every creak of the hull sounding like doom. Above, the destroyers churned, their screws thrumming like angry gods. Depth charges rained down, each blast a hammer against the hull. Dust and rust flakes sifted from the ceiling, stinging my eyes. My stomach lurched with every shockwave, ears ringing, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. A comrade crossed himself in silence. Another clutched a photo of his wife. I clenched my fists and stared at the deck, praying we would not hear the sound of tearing steel. And then, silence. Minutes crawled by. Sweat dripped down faces. Lungs ached from holding breath. Slowly, cautiously, the boat rose again. When we peeked through the periscope, the sight was both beautiful and terrible. Burning ships listing, oil slicks flaming on the water, sailors clinging to lifeboats, their cries faint in the night. The captain lowered the scope without a word. The crew still whispered in triumph, but my throat was tight. I remember the lifeboats from our first patrol. The men's voices carried on the wind. Now there were more, scattered across the waves, pleading with the same sea that drowned friend and foe alike. Still, the wolf pack pressed on. Another U-boat surfaced nearby, its crew waving to us from the conning tower, faces lit by the glow of fire on the horizon. They laughed, shouted, held up fingers to signal their kills. Our men answered with raised fists, the bond of hunters, sealed in smoke and flame. Back below, the cook served thin soup and black bread, and we ate in silence, the smell of diesel and sweat filling the air. I could hear muffled singing from the forward compartment, a sailor's song about home, about sweethearts waiting by the sea. The tune sounded strange against the background of explosions and distant cries. When dawn came, the convoy was scattered, ships sinking into the cold Atlantic. We had survived, and we had fed the pack. In the logbook, the victory was recorded in tonnage sunk, numbers that meant nothing to me except the lives behind them. As we turned back toward base, the men were jubilant. Medals would be given, promotions earned. The Reich would celebrate. But deep inside, I felt something gnawing. We were wolves, yes, but I wondered if we were also already trapped in the hunter's cage. By 1941, the ocean had become both our hunting ground and our prison. The Reich called it the Battle of the Atlantic. To us, it was simply survival. The longer the patrol, the thinner the line between life and death. We set out from Lorient in February, the boat heavy with fuel, food, and torpedoes. The pens were crowded with U-boats, each sliding into the gray sea like a shark. Families waved from the piers, though fewer now than before. Too many had stopped coming, their sons never returning. As our boat slipped from the harbor, I watched the concrete walls shrink behind us and felt the cold bite of the Atlantic creep into my bones. Days stretched into weeks. The Atlantic was endless, a rolling plain of steel-gray waves beneath a sky that seemed always cold. The boat rocked endlessly, the air inside thick with diesel, sweat, and unwashed bodies. Food spoiled quickly, bread growing mold, sausages turning sour. We rationed everything: water, coffee, even air when we dove for too long. The boredom was crushing. We played cards, told jokes, sang crude songs, anything to fight the monotony. Men slept wherever they could, sharing bunks in shifts, squeezed between torpedoes and machinery. The engines never stopped growling. The air never smelled fresh. After weeks submerged, your own skin itched, your beard grew wild, and your lungs longed for clean air. But boredom could vanish in a heartbeat. One night, while stalking a convoy far into the Atlantic, we caught sight of an escort. The alarm rang through the boat. Crash dive. We tumbled into our positions, the hull groaning as we plunged beneath the waves. The sound of the surface faded, replaced by the hum of motors and the ominous creak of pressure. Then came the first depth charges. The explosions pounded the hull, shockwaves slamming through the steel, rattling bolts and fittings. Lights flickered, water sprayed from loosened valves, men cursed and prayed under their breath. The boat shook as if a giant had seized it. Dust and rust rained from the ceiling, stinging my eyes. "Silent running," the captain hissed. The engine slowed, every sound inside the boat reduced to whispers and the thump of our hearts. We drifted in the dark, the pressure crush in the air growing foul. Above us, the destroyer prowled, its screws thrumming like an executioner's drum. Another string of charges detonated, closer, the hull bending with the force. I pressed my face to the steel, hearing it groan, as if it were alive and in pain. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. The oxygen grew thin. Sweat slicked our faces. Every man afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud. I imagined the bolts bursting, the sea pouring in, the Atlantic filling our lungs. And then, silence. The destroyer moved on, fooled by our stillness. Slowly, cautiously, the captain ordered us to rise. The relief was so strong it hurt. Men laughed shakily. Some cried. Others sat with blank eyes, too drained to speak. We survived, but the truth was clear. The convoy had been warned. The Allies were learning. The ocean was no longer ours alone. Still, we pressed on. Days later, we attacked again, firing torpedoes into the dark. This time, we struck a tanker. Through the periscope, I saw flames bloom, oil slicks spreading like poison across the water. The men cheered, slapping backs, recording the kill. But my eyes lingered on the burning sea, on the shadows of sailors leaping into lifeboats, their faces red with firelight. I remembered their voices long after we dove again. By the end of the patrol, we were exhausted. The air inside the boat was stale, the food gone, the men pale and gaunt. When we finally limped back to Lorient, medals awaited us. The captain received the Iron Cross. We stood in formation as speeches praised our tonnage sunk, the Reich's lifeline, saved by our courage. Cameras flashed, and for a moment we were heroes. But behind the smiles, I saw something else in my comrades' eyes. A shadow. We all knew what we had felt when the charges rained down, when the hull shuddered and the sea pressed in. We all knew survival was luck as much as skill. As I walked through the harbor, past rows of fresh-faced recruits bound for their first patrol, I wondered how many would return. The ocean was vast, merciless, and patient. We were small, fragile, and doomed to gamble against it again and again. The Reich still called us hunters, wolves of the sea. But I had begun to see us differently. We were men in an iron coffin, daring the sea to crush us each time we closed the hatch. and I knew one day the sea would win. In early 1942, we thought fortune had returned to us. The Americans had joined the war, but their coast was still wide open. They sailed with lights blazing, convoys unescorted, tankers drifting like lanterns across the Atlantic. We called it the Zweitglückliche Zeit, the second happy time. For a few months, we feasted. I remember the first time we approached the American coast. The skyline of New York was faint on the horizon, glowing like a beacon. Ships streamed in and out of harbors as if war were far away. At night, whole cities glowed behind them, careless and bright. Through the periscope, I saw tankers silhouetted against the lights of shore. It was like shooting at shadows on a wall. We struck again and again. Torpedoes slammed into hulls. Fire blossomed across the waves, columns of smoke climbing into the night sky. The crew cheered each hit, the captain's voice steady as he gave orders. The log filling with tonnage sunk. To us below decks, it felt almost easy compared to the hunted weeks of the Atlantic. But even in victory, I felt unease. One night, after we hit a freighter, I saw survivors scrambling on deck, waving frantically as flames consumed the ship. Through the scope, their faces were clear in the firelight, men not so different from us, shouting for help that would never come. When I turned away, my stomach twisted. Later, in my bunk, the cheers of my comrades echoed hollow in my ears. The patrols grew longer, the kills more frequent. Supplies ran low. We ate moldy bread and drank bitter coffee. Our beards thick, our skin gray from weeks without sun. Yet spirit soared with each sinking. Letters from home praised us. The Reich broadcast our victories. The U-boats were still the pride of Germany. But beneath the pride, the sea was changing. The first hint came off Cape Hatteras. We had just finished reloading when a plane roared overhead. Its shadow flickered across the waves, and moments later, bombs crashed into the water around us. We crash-dived, the hull shuddering as explosions pounded the surface. The boat groaned, gauges rattled, men cursed as water sprayed from a ruptured valve. For hours we lay in silence, the stink of oil filling the compartments, hearts pounding as the plane circled above. The captain muttered that it was nothing, just bad luck. But after that, the sky seemed full of wings. Allied planes appeared more often, their eyes sharp, their bombs precise. Convoys sailed tighter now, destroyers bristling with guns and sonar. What had once been easy kills turned into desperate fights. One night in May, we shadowed a convoy off Halifax. The seas were calm, the moon bright, perfect for an attack. But as we lined up, the escorts turned toward us as if they knew we were there. Depth charges rained down. The boat hammered so hard I thought the hull would split. The noise was deafening, steel shrieking, men gripping rails until their knuckles bled. The air stank of sweat and fear. We escaped, but barely. When we surfaced hours later, the sky was empty, but the crew looked broken. The captain's jaw was tight, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. By summer, the news from other boats was grim. Whole wolf packs were disappearing, swallowed by convoys bristling with new weapons. Allied radar and sonar hunted us like bloodhounds. The ocean that had once seemed ours now bristled with unseen traps. Still, we sailed. Still, we hunted. Each patrol was a gamble with thinner odds. The laughter on board grew strained, the jokes fewer. At night, as I lay in my bunk above a torpedo, I stared into the dark and wondered if the sea was already claiming us in advance, waiting patiently for the next dive. And yet there were moments of light. The cook once surprised us with a hidden jar of jam, smuggled from France. We spread it on hard bread, savoring each bite like it was a feast. Another time, one of the men pulled out a harmonica, playing a tune that reminded us of home. For a few minutes, laughter returned. The steel walls seemed less suffocating, and we were simply men together on the sea. But always the depth charges followed. Always the sky filled with planes. By the end of 1942, the happy time was gone. The Allies were learning faster than we could adapt. We had sunk many ships, yes, but we had lost many boats too. Each time we returned to port, fewer U-boats lined the pens, and the silence of the missing pressed heavier than the cheers of victory. The tide was turning, though we barely admitted it. We still wore our badges proudly, still toasted to the Reich, still called ourselves hunters. But in the silence of the control room, with the sea pressing against the hull and the charges falling closer each time, I felt the truth deep in my bones. The hunter was becoming the hunted. By 1943, the sea was no longer ours. The Allies had grown sharp and merciless, their convoys bristling with escorts, their skies thick with patrol aircraft. The wolf packs that had once prowled in strength were now torn apart, boat by boat, until the Atlantic felt less like a hunting ground and more like a graveyard. We left Lorient in spring, morale low before we even cleared the harbor. The pens echoed hollow. Too many boats had failed to return. Men kept their eyes down, not speaking the names of those missing. Superstition ran deep aboard a U-boat. To say a lost comrade's name aloud was to invite the sea to take you too. Days into the patrol, we sighted a convoy. 50 ships at least, their silhouettes blotting the horizon. We lined up for the attack, nerves taut. At the periscope, the captain's voice was steady, but his eyes flicked constantly to the escorts. Destroyers cut the waves like wolves on chains, waiting for us. Still, we fired. Torpedoes streaked from the tubes, the boat jolting as each left. Seconds later, explosions rolled across the sea, 2 tankers burning, black smoke clawing the sky. The celebration lasted only a heartbeat. The escorts were on us instantly. Sirens wailed from their decks, and then came the first depth charges. The boat shuddered as blasts tore the water above us. The shock waves slammed into the hull, lights flickering, gauges rattling. The air filled with acrid smoke from shaken batteries, stinging our eyes and throats. Dust and rust rained from the ceiling, coating our skin. Men clenched rails until their knuckles whitened. Others pressed hands to ears as if to block out the thunder. Silent running, the captain barked. Engines slowed, lights dimmed. We sank deeper, deeper still, the hull creaking under the weight. My heart pounded as the pressure closed in, every breath a struggle. The destroyers circled like sharks. We could hear their screws thrumming above us, sonar pings echoing through the water, sharp, metallic, searching. Another string of charges detonated, closer this time. The boat bucked violently, men thrown against steel. A valve burst, spraying water across the compartment. Someone screamed. Another man crossed himself, lips moving in prayer. Hours passed like this. Charges falling, silence, then charges again. The sea itself seemed to roar, hammering us without mercy. The air grew foul, heavy with sweat and fear. My lungs ached. My stomach twisted, but worse than the fear was the waiting. The endless waiting for the blast that would finally rip us apart. At one point, the hull groaned so loud I thought it would split. Rivets popped, the sound sharp as gunshots. The chief engineer shouted reports, his face pale, sweat pouring down his brow. The captain stood rigid, gripping the periscope column, his jaw clenched, but his voice calm. "Hold fast," he whispered, more to himself than to us. The charges went on into the night. Time blurred into an endless thunder. Men slumped where they sat, too exhausted to move, eyes blank with terror. I clutched a small crucifix my mother had given me, pressing it into my palm until the metal bit into my skin. I thought of her, of the Baltic shore, of gulls wheeling above the surf. I wondered if I would ever see them again. And then at last, silence. The destroyers moved on, fooled or weary of the hunt. We floated in the black, listening to the creaks of the hull, the slow drip of leaking pipes, our own ragged breathing. No one spoke for a long time. When we finally surfaced, the night air hit us like salvation. Men stumbled onto the conning tower, gulping the cold wind as if it were water. Stars glittered above, indifferent to our suffering. Behind us, far on the horizon, fires still burned where the tankers had gone down. The captain stared at them for a long while, then lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. We had survived, but barely. The engineers said another close blast would have split us open. We all knew it was only luck that had spared us. Luck. And luck runs out. Back in the control room, the crew tried to laugh, tried to slap shoulders and call themselves wolves. But the sound was hollow. Too many had heard the hull groan. Too many had tasted the sea pressing in. By the end of that patrol, our nerves were frayed, our bodies gaunt, our eyes sunken. We had sunk ships, yes, but at what cost? The Allies had turned the ocean into a trap, and we were the prey. The old joke among sailors was that U-boats were eiserne Särge, iron coffins. We used to laugh at it. Now no one laughed. The coffin lid was closing, and we all knew it. The boat had always felt cramped, but by the autumn of 1943, it seemed to close in tighter with each patrol. The air was heavier, the silence more suffocating, the shadows longer. We had become ghosts in steel, drifting through a sea that no longer wanted us. They called the U-boat an eiserne Sarg, an iron coffin. At first it was a joke, something we muttered with a grin as we strapped ourselves into bunks above live torpedoes. Now, it was the truth. Every dive felt like a burial. Every time the hatch sealed, I wondered if we would ever open it again. Patrols grew longer and longer, days submerged until the batteries strained and the air turned foul. The taste of diesel and sweat clung to the tongue. The men's faces grew gray in the dim red lights, eyes sunken, skin slick with oil. Water dripped constantly, seeping through pipes, running down bulkheads. We slept in shifts, the thrum of machinery our lullaby, the fear of sudden death our only dream. When we did surface, it was brief. The snorkel rasping against waves, the sky always threatening. Aircraft prowled everywhere now, their shadows swooping even in the middle of the Atlantic. Once, a Liberator appeared out of the clouds before we could dive. Bombs splashed close, geysers towering over the conning tower as we crashed down. Men stumbled, cursing, while above, the sky roared with engines and death. We escaped again, but not all did. News filtered through the radio of boats that never returned. A friend from training, Hans, had gone out with U-356. Gone. No survivors. Another crew we knew, men we had drunk with in Lorient, vanished off the Azores. Sometimes we heard the details. Wreckage found, bodies in the water, oil slicks stretching for miles. More often there was nothing, just silence. Each time we returned to port, the pens felt emptier. Fewer boats lined the docks. The laughter in the taverns was quieter, the songs shorter, eyes haunted. We toasted the lost, but the glasses trembled in our hands. Life aboard grew tense. Tempers flared over small things. Stale bread, cramped hammocks, unwashed bodies brushing past in the narrow passages. Once, 2 men nearly came to blows over a stolen cigarette. The captain broke it up with a glare, but the tension lingered like smoke. We were brothers, yes, but brothers trapped in a coffin will bite one another when the air runs thin. And yet, even in that darkness, there were moments of light. One night, deep beneath the waves, the cook passed around a single jar of jam he had saved from France. We spread it on hard bread, the sweetness almost foreign on our tongues. For a few minutes we smiled, even laughed, as if we were boys again. Another time, Carl, the youngest among us, pulled out his harmonica and played a tune that reminded us of home. The sound echoed through the steel hull, fragile and beautiful, a reminder that life still clung to us. But always, the sea reminded us of its power. One patrol we shadowed a convoy for 2 days, stalking, waiting. Finally, we struck at night, torpedoes roaring from the tubes, explosions lighting the horizon. A freighter burned, its silhouette glowing against the black. But the escorts were merciless. Depth charges hammered us for 12 straight hours. The boat groaned, water trickled in, the air thick with fumes. I pressed my cheek against the steel, hearing it scream as the ocean clawed to crush us. When the charges stopped at last, we lay in silence, barely daring to breathe. The captain whispered, "We are still here." But his eyes were hollow, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. He knew, as we all did, that each patrol was a coin toss with death. Back in port, medals still waited. Officers still pinned iron crosses on uniforms. Speeches still praised our courage. But the truth was plain in the empty bunks, in the rows of helmets lined on the dockside memorials. We were not wolves anymore. We were prey. The boat had become our coffin. We lived in it, laughed in it, fought in it. And one day, we would die in it. As I lay in my bunk, the harmonica tune still faint in my ears, I closed my eyes and saw the sea above me, black, infinite, patient. The sea did not hate us. It did not care. It simply waited, pressing its weight against our hull, whispering that sooner or later, it would take us all. By 1944, the sea felt like a graveyard. Too many names had been scratched from the rolls. Too many boats never returned. Still, the Reich ordered us back again and again. This time, we had something new. The snorkel. The snorkel was supposed to be salvation. A pipe that let us run the diesels while submerged, keeping us hidden from the Allied planes that scoured the sky. In truth, it was only a reprieve. The snorkel throbbed and rattled, drawing air that stank of exhaust. Sometimes, waves washed over its head, sucking seawater into the boat, choking us on salt and fumes. Men coughed and cursed, but at least we were alive. Alive but buried deeper than ever. Our patrols stretched longer now, hiding under the sea for days at a time. The air grew foul quickly, stale, heavy, making every breath a labor. Condensation dripped from pipes like sweat, trickling onto our necks. Mold spread across the bread, rations shrank, tempers frayed. We lived like moles, gnawing stale biscuits in the dark, waiting for the sea to open a crack. And yet, the hunt went on. One night in the Bay of Biscay, we crept toward a convoy under silent running, snorkel just breaking the waves. Sonar pings echoed faint through the hull, but the escorts hadn't found us yet. The captain raised the periscope briefly, just a slit of an eye in the black. "Convoy ahead," he whispered. Shadows of tankers and freighters moved slowly across the waves, like giants in the dark. Orders snapped through the control room. "Torpedo irons, loss." The hiss filled the compartment, the boat shuddering as the weapon shot out. Then another, and another. Seconds stretched into eternity, and then detonation. The whole boat seemed to vibrate as fire leapt on the horizon. Men cheered, fists pounding the steel walls. For a moment we were hunters again, wolves in the night. But the wolves had no teeth left. The convoy erupted into chaos. Searchlights swept the waves. Destroyers roared forward, their screws hammering through the water. Depth charges followed, closer than ever. The first detonations punched the hull so hard my ears rang. Dust and rust cascaded from the ceiling, men gripping rails, jaws clenched to keep from screaming. For hours they hunted us. Sonar pings hammered through the water, followed by blasts that rolled the boat like a toy. Water sprayed from cracked valves. The air filled with smoke from rattled batteries. The oxygen thinned. Sweat poured down faces. The stench of fear clung to every breath. One man fainted, collapsing onto the deck. Lips blue until someone slapped him awake. We survived only by sinking deeper than we ever had, the hull creaking, groaning like an animal in pain. I pressed my hand to the steel, feeling it tremble, praying it would not give way. At last, the charges stopped. The destroyers pulled back, either fooled or simply weary. We floated in the dark, too afraid to move. The silence was worse than the blasts. Every creak sounded like the end. When we finally surfaced, the night was calm. The fires of the convoy burned far off, orange against the horizon. The captain lit a cigarette, his hand trembling. No one cheered. We had sunk ships, yes, but the price was too clear. We were not victors. We were survivors. And survival was luck. In the mess, men sat hollow-eyed, chewing hard bread without taste. Someone muttered that we were already dead, just waiting for the sea to notice. Another cursed him, saying he was inviting bad luck. They nearly fought before the captain stepped in, his voice sharp as a blade. The silence after was heavier than the steel around us. Yet even then, life found cracks. Carl pulled out his harmonica again, the same tune he always played. It echoed through the hull, thin but defiant. Men smiled faintly, some even hummed along. For a few minutes the coffin felt less tight, less cold. But when the notes faded, the sea pressed close again. The Allies ruled the oceans now. Our snorkel kept us alive, but barely. We crept through waters thick with hunters, firing when we could, hiding when we must, always running, always fearing. The Reich still spoke of victory, of new weapons, of salvation. But in the boat we knew, the sea had turned against us, and each patrol was just another gamble in an iron coffin. By the end of 1944, the U-boat war had become a slow suicide. Every patrol began with speeches about honor and sacrifice, but none of us believed them anymore. We all knew the truth. Each time we left port, we rolled dice with death, and the odds grew worse with every patrol. The pens at Lorient were nearly empty now. The concrete walls echoed with footsteps, not laughter. Boats that had once returned with banners and bands were gone, swallowed by the Atlantic. We did not speak their names, but we felt their ghosts each time we walked across the damp floor to our own steel coffin. We sailed again in December. Snow dusted the pens, and the wind bit through our coats. Families no longer gathered to wave us off. There were no crowds, no music, only a few wives and mothers clutching scarves, tears frozen on their cheeks. I tried not to meet their eyes. Once at sea, the old rhythm returned. Diesel thrum, steel creaks, stink of oil and sweat. But the mood had changed. The jokes were fewer, the songs quieter. Men smoked in silence, staring at nothing. We carried death with us, not just in torpedoes, but in our very lungs. One night, while submerged on snorkel, the pipe sucked in seawater during a storm. The diesels coughed, choking us with fumes. Men gagged, eyes watering, lungs burning. The chief engineer screamed orders, pounding valves with his fists until the engine steadied. We survived, but the taste of diesel clung to my throat for days, and every breath felt poisoned. When we did encounter convoys, the escorts were merciless. Radar, sonar, planes circling like vultures. It felt as if the Allies could see us even in the blackest night. We tried to strike, but each attack ended in hours of depth charges. The sea roared with explosions. The hull groaned as if it would crack open. Once, the lights went out completely. We sat in darkness, listening to water trickle in, the air growing hotter and fouler with every passing minute. I clutched my crucifix, whispering prayers I wasn't sure I believed anymore. Men muttered to themselves, some weeping silently. The captain stood rigid in the dark, his face lit only by the glow of his cigarette. When the charges finally stopped, he whispered, "We live another day." No one cheered. We were too drained to feel anything but emptiness. By January 1945, rumors swept through the fleet. Germany was collapsing, cities in ruins, the Allies advancing on all fronts. But still, the Reich demanded our patrols. Still, they told us to fight, to sacrifice, to believe. We no longer believed, we only endured. Strange things happened in those last months. One patrol, we captured a lifeboat after sinking a freighter. Inside were half a dozen men, shivering, desperate. The captain ordered them taken aboard for questioning. I will never forget their faces, hollow-eyed, half dead, looking at us not as enemies but as fellow prisoners of the sea. We gave them water, a crust of bread. One whispered thank you in broken German. Later, they were transferred to another ship, but their faces stayed with me. They were no different from us, sailors trapped in a dying war. Sometimes, when we surfaced for air, the night was so quiet it felt sacred. Stars blazed above, the sea smooth as glass. I stood on the conning tower, cold wind biting my face, and for a moment, I felt free. No engines, no charges, no fear, just the vast ocean and the stars. Then the hatch would close, the coffin sealing again, and the weight of death returned. The crew clung to small rituals. Carl still played his harmonica, though the notes were thinner now. The cook saved scraps to make feasts. A little jam, a slice of sausage, coffee so weak it tasted like water. We pretended it was a banquet, laughing hollowly, knowing it might be our last. By spring, whispers filled the air. The war would soon end. Some men prayed for it. Others dreaded it, fearing what would come after. I only felt tired. So tired. The boat felt less like a weapon now and more like a tomb. Steel walls sweated with condensation, air heavy with despair. Every creak was a warning, every ping of sonar a death knell. We were silent hunters, yes, but hunted more than ever, drifting through a sea that had turned against us. The Reich still painted us as heroes, but we were just men, trapped in an iron coffin, waiting for the sea to claim us. And we knew, if the war did not end soon, it surely would. Our final patrol began in April 1945, though none of us dared call it final. By then, every man aboard knew the war was lost. Berlin was surrounded, the Allies closing in from east and west, but still the orders came. Sail, attack, disrupt. The Reich demanded sacrifice even as the nation burned. We left Lorient under a grey sky, the harbor quiet. No bands, no families, no flags. Only the echo of our boots on concrete and the gulls crying overhead. The pens, once alive with dozens of boats, felt like a graveyard. Most were gone, destroyed at sea, sunk in port, or rusting in pieces. We were among the last. Inside, the boat was the same as ever. Diesel fumes, sweat, cramped bunks, torpedoes gleaming in their racks. But the faces had changed. The laughter was gone. Eyes were hollow, jaws clenched, hands shaking when they lit cigarettes. Even the captain, once calm and commanding, seemed older, his hair grayer, his voice heavier. The North Atlantic greeted us with storms. Waves pounded the hull, the boat pitching and rolling until men vomited into buckets. Water seeped through hatches, dripping constantly, turning the floor slick. The cook tried to serve soup, but it spilled across the deck with every lurch. We ate dry bread, moldy and hard, our teeth aching with each bite. When the sea calmed, the silence was worse. Every sonar ping, every flicker on the hydrophone sent a shiver through us. The Allies hunted with merciless precision now. Planes roared overhead even hundreds of kilometers from land. Destroyers appeared on the horizon as if conjured from mist. Each time we dove, heartbeats hammering as charges fell, the hull groaning, water trickling through cracks. One night near the English Channel, we tried to strike. The convoy was well escorted, but desperation drove us. Torpedoes slid from the tubes, hissing into the dark. Moments later, explosions thundered, a freighter burning bright against the horizon. Cheers rose briefly, hollow and sharp, before the destroyers turned. They came for us like wolves. Depth charges rained down, the sea erupting, the boat rolling violently. Lights flickered, gauges rattled, pipes burst, smoke filled the control room, men coughing, eyes watering. The captain shouted orders, voice hoarse. "Silent running!" "Hold steady." For hours the hunt continued. Charges boomed above, closer and closer. The hull shrieked, metal bending, rivets popping. The floor vibrated with each blast, my teeth rattling, my ears ringing. I pressed my hands to the steel, feeling it tremble like a living thing in agony. One man broke, screaming that the sea would crush us. Another slapped him silent. We sank deeper, past the limits we had trained for. The pressure pressed on my chest, crushing, my lungs aching with every breath. The air grew foul, hot, suffocating. Sweat ran into my eyes, stinging, mixing with oil and grime. I thought of my mother's face, of gulls over the Baltic, of sunlight I might never see again. And then, silence. The charges stopped. Only the creak of steel and the rasp of our own breath remained. Hours passed before we dared rise. When at last we surfaced, the night was black, the convoy gone, the horizon empty. We had lived, barely. The crew did not cheer. We sat in silence, gasping at the cold night air, stars glittering above. Men smoked in silence, eyes haunted. The captain lit a cigarette, his hand trembling as he exhaled. "Another day," he muttered. Not victory, just survival. But survival meant little now. Days later, news came over the radio. Berlin was falling, the Führer dead, surrender imminent. The war was over. We were ordered to return to port, to scuttle the boat if necessary. The Reich had ended while we drifted in the Atlantic, hunted, half dead, forgotten. As we turned back, the sea was calm. I stood on the conning tower, wind biting my face, staring at the horizon. Around me, the crew moved silently, their eyes fixed on nothing. We had fought for years, sunk ships, dodged charges, buried comrades, and for what? The Reich was dust, our friends were dead, and we were alive only by chance. The boat groaned beneath me, steel cold under my boots. It was our coffin, our cage, our home. I felt both relief and sorrow that it would not take me now. The final patrol had ended not with glory, not with medals, but with emptiness. The sea had spared us, but it had also claimed us. We would walk on land again, but part of us would always remain down there, in the black depths, listening to the pings and the charges, waiting for the final crack of steel. The sea had let us go, but it had already taken everything. The war ended not with a final patrol, but with silence. Orders came down the radio in May 1945. Germany had surrendered. U-boats at sea were told to surface, fly black flags, and surrender to the nearest Allied port. Just like that, the iron coffin was no longer a weapon but a relic. We sailed into captivity with engines rattling and hearts hollow. The Allies met us with suspicion, guns trained, but also relief. We were beaten men, grey and thin, eyes sunken from years underground. They herded us into camps, stripped us of weapons, made us wait. For the first time in years, I breathed clean air without fear of bombers overhead. And yet, I felt no freedom, only emptiness. In the weeks that followed, the boat was scuttled, sunk deliberately so the Allies could not claim her. Watching her slide beneath the waves, I felt something inside me tear. She had been our coffin, yes, but also our home, our shield against the fury of the sea. Now she lay on the bottom, silent forever, like so many of her sisters. When I returned to Germany, I found ruins, cities reduced to ash, families scattered or gone. My childhood street was rubble, the church collapsed, the harbor empty. My mother had survived, older and thinner, her eyes too tired for tears. She hugged me as if I were still a boy, but I felt like a ghost in her arms. People asked about the war, about the boats, about the wolves of the Atlantic. Some looked at me with admiration, others with disgust. I had no answers for them. What could I say? That I had sunk ships? Yes, but also heard the screams of drowning sailors, that I had seen comrades crushed by the sea, their faces frozen in terror, that medals meant nothing when half your crew never came home. I carried the weight in silence. At night, I dreamed of depth charges, the hull groaning, the air choking with smoke. I woke with sweat on my skin, ears ringing with phantom blasts. The war had ended, but it still lived in my chest, in my lungs, in the steel echoes that never faded. Sometimes I walked along the coast, staring at the horizon. The sea looked peaceful, gulls wheeling above, waves rolling endlessly, but I could not see it as others did. To me, it was a grave. Beneath those waters lay hundreds of boats, thousands of men, entombed forever in steel. Friends, comrades, boys who had laughed and sung and smoked beside me, now only ghosts in the deep. Why had I lived when so many had not? I had no answer. Perhaps luck. Perhaps fate. Perhaps the sea simply hadn't wanted me yet. But survival carried its own burden. I lived, yes. But I lived with the voices of the lost in my ears, with their faces in my dreams. The Reich was gone, its banners torn, its leaders dead or hunted. The speeches of glory meant nothing now. What remained were memories, both of comradeship and of horror. The laughter of Karl's harmonica drifting through the steel hull. The smell of jam spread thin on hard bread, shared as if it were treasure. The sight of burning convoys, of men leaping into black waves. The endless thrum of engines, the suffocating air, the creak of a hull under pressure. I am an old man now. The years have carried me far from those days, but the memories cling like barnacles on a hull. I sit by the sea sometimes, watching the tide, hearing the gulls. People walk past me, children laugh, life goes on. But when I close my eyes, I hear the sonar pings again. I feel the pressure of the deep. I see the faces of men I left behind. They called us wolves once, hunters of the sea. But I know the truth. We were boys locked in iron coffins, gambling each day with death. Some lost quickly, some slowly. I survived. But survival is not victory. When I am gone, perhaps the sea will take me too. And maybe then I will rest beside the comrades I lost, in the silent black where the U-boats lie waiting forever. Until then, I remain above the waves, haunted but alive, a sailor of the deep, a prisoner of memory, a survivor of the coffin that never truly let me go.